Hi, good morning, good evening, and hello to everyone who's here. I'm Trevor Woltmer, and I'm the Director of Ocean Conservancy's Plastics Initiatives Program. Just an administrative note, we'll be recording. We'll be starting the webinar in a couple of minutes, but we're looking forward to talking to you shortly. Okay, so once again, good morning, good evening, hello from wherever you're joining us. My name is Trevor Woltmer, and I'm the Director of Plastics Initiatives at Ocean Conservancy. We're really excited to see everyone signing on, and hello from Argentina, Maldives, and all over the world, wherever you're joining us from today. I'm really delighted to welcome you to what is a major milestone in the Urban Ocean program. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. We know that the last thing that anyone wants is another Zoom call, but we are truly excited about this work. So we're going to hear from a diverse group today, but speaking from the ocean conservation perspective, when we launched Urban Ocean, our hope was that we could find a way to embed circular economy principles and marine debris prevention into broader city priorities like public health, job creation, greenhouse gas emissions, tourism, and other economic development. Because cities are really at the center of the modern world, and we felt it was truly important to include them in the conversation around marine debris. From the beginning, we knew that Urban Ocean was an ambitious effort, but we really could not have guessed how ambitious. When the COVID pandemic emerged, cities were hit with simultaneous and health, economic, and social crises. It was, and still is, a time of unprecedented strain on urban systems. Around the world, saving and protecting lives had to become the first priority. So I am truly humbled and gratified that despite these challenges, our cities remained committed to the Urban Ocean program and vision. In fact, we even had additional cities join the program, and our original cohort of 5 has now expanded to 11. This presented a second dilemma. Because of pandemic restrictions, the project team couldn't travel. So our carefully designed program and timelines went out the window. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the incredibly hard work undertaken by everyone on this screen and many others who are not to reimagine the Urban Ocean program in a drastically changed world. Dr. Jambeck and her team began creating and designing protocols and tools so that the CAP could be delivered remotely. The Resilient Cities team did the same and adapted their methodology to create the Opportunities Assessment Tool, a critical part of the gap assessment, and the cities. With everything else on their plates, they stepped up to identify local implementing partners who could do the field work when the project team could not. They brought their insight, their expertise, and their enthusiasm to the project in a way that kept us all inspired. And I want to thank each and every one of the Urban Ocean cities, both the learning cities and the mentor cities, for their support over the last year. So we will hear from our panel today about what we've learned and what we plan to do with that knowledge in the course of implementing the Circularity Assessment Protocol. But before turning the discussion over to my fellow Urban Ocean partners, I would like to draw out one more lesson, which I'm not sure is a surprise for our Urban Ocean partners. And that's really about the importance of networks, partnerships, and collaboration. It's what kept this program moving when so much of the world stopped. So what's more, really tapping into the local expertise and knowledge in all of the Urban Ocean cities has made the program richer, fostering more cross-learning and allowing us, in the words of one Chief Resilience Officer, not just to bounce back, but to bounce forward. And if that isn't the very definition of resilience, I do not know what is. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my fellow Urban Ocean partners. First, I'd like to introduce Ellen Martin, Impact and Insights Director of the Circulate Initiative. In her role, Ellen is responsible for driving impact and insights for the Circulate Initiative, its flagship program. the incubation network, and other strategic partnerships. Ellen ensures TCI and its partners connect with the data and learning they need to inform strategies that prevent plastic leakage and advance an inclusive circular economy. Ellen also chairs TCI's Impact Metrics Working Group, of which I am a member, and serves as the Chief Impact Officer at Circulate Capital. Previously, Ellen led impact and research at Closed Loop Partner. As a member of Closed Loop Fund's investment team, she managed the fund's due diligence process and investment portfolio as it grew to $50 million in project financing deployed across North America. While at Closed Loop, Ellen also directed research, including studies on advanced recycling technologies for plastics, the economies of PET recycling, and strategies to increase the supply of post.
So I guess we have lost Trevor. Ellen, do you want to take on?
Yes, amazing. I thought it was my laptop. Anyway, I will jump in. Hi, everyone. Trevor gave me a very kind introduction. Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here. It is truly an honor. So hello and welcome, and thank you all for being here today. As Trevor mentioned, the Circulate Initiative is focused on insights and incubation to make sure that we are advancing an inclusive and circular economy to solve the ocean plastic challenge. We partner to do that, and the Urban Ocean Partnership has been a tremendous part of our work in the past year and a half. Part of the reason that the Circulate Initiative exists is really to recognize that there is a lack of data as we try to solve the ocean plastic crisis. And without that data, we don't know where we're starting from. And if we don't know where we're starting from, it's hard to get to where we want to go. And for that reason, it's been an amazing and terrific experience to work with Jenna and her team at the University of Georgia to contribute this important piece of research towards the Urban Ocean program and for the cities that have been participants. We're at this moment that's really critical in solving the problem, that in order to build a more resilient future, innovation has to happen in order for clean, healthy cities and clean, healthy oceans to become a reality. And I couldn't think of a better group of people to move this work forward. So I'm really excited to hear from the group today. And thank you again for joining us. Katrine, I pass it on to you?
Thank you so much, Ellen. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. It's a huge pleasure to be with you today. As you heard from Ellen and from Trevor, this is an amazing partnership. And to be honest, also one of the first or even the first partnership which we as Resilient Cities Network started after becoming independent from the Rockefeller Foundation. So Urban Ocean in general has a very special place in our hearts. So looking at the people on the screen and looking at most probably or hearing to everybody who's listening to this webinar today. So we are the crazy resilience people. And the big question is, what are the resilience people doing with the ocean people and the waste people? And to explain a little bit from our perspective why we partner with TCI and OC and why we are so happy is that we understand that waste management is a critical urban system. And as a critical urban system, it needs to be part of resilience building in cities. We also recognize that planning for resilience requires partnerships. And it means that you're not only partnering with people you know anyway, but you also try to develop new partnerships to actually enhance the impact. And Ellen knows much more what I'm talking about because she's the impact specialist here. So having said that, is the resilience people, and Mahesh, who you will hear from later on this call, is actually representing one of our chief resilience officers. We are working with 97 cities around the world in building urban resilience, waste management being one of the critical systems. And we recognize that if we want to protect our ecosystems and if we want to protect the largest ecosystem in the world, our ocean, we have to work with amazing teams like the team from Jenna, who agreed, and I guess Trevor had a large part in that, in making sure that we were able, as these crazy resilience people, to work with such amazing teams based in the US in actually identifying the risks and vulnerabilities in waste management in our cities. And I think that's where Jenna and her team has come in and have taken the important first step in highlighting where cities need to get better in managing their waste to prevent marine litter. And as that part, the CAP and the assessments we have been carrying out are the major important first step in building resilience in our cities, because it means we understand our risks, we understand our vulnerabilities, we understand where we have to go first, where we have to prioritize to make cities a better place and a more equitable place, and to build back better, although I don't really like this sentence, but to build resilience and recover from the impact of COVID-19. So it's a huge pleasure for us. And I'm happy to hand back to Trevor, who's back now, and have a wonderful webinar.
So thank you. Small power outage on my end, but I'm back. You didn't actually really need me. It kept moving just perfectly. So now let's turn to Dr. Jenna Jambeck, who is the Georgia Athletic Association Distinguished Professor in Environmental Engineering in the College of Engineering and Director for the Center of Circular Materials Management in the New Materials Institute at the University of Georgia. That is a mouthful, Jenna, and a National Geographic Fellow. She has been conducting research on solid waste issues for over 23 years with related projects on marine debris for 19. She also specializes in global waste management issues and plastic contamination. Her work on plastic waste inputs into the ocean has been recognized by the global community and translated into policy discussions by the Global Ocean Commission, in testimony to the US Congress, in G7 and G20 declarations, and the United Nations Environment Program. She conducts public environmental diplomacy as an international informational speaker for the US Department of State, which is where I met her. And in 2014, she sailed across the Atlantic Ocean with 13 other women in expedition to sample land and open ocean plastic and encourage women to enter STEM disciplines. She is co-developer of the mobile app Marine Debris Tracker, a tool that continues to facilitate a growing global citizen science initiative. The app and citizen science program have documented the location of over 2 million litter and marine debris items removed from our environment throughout the world. Jenna, over to you.
Thanks, Trevor, for that wonderful introduction. Let me share my screen as I get started here. I just wanted to echo the gratitude and echo what a tremendous experience this has been to work with such amazing partners. It's really, we couldn't scale what we're doing without all of the people participating. So although you'll hear me speak, there's so many people who have been involved in this entire process, and I'm just so grateful for that. So starting, I think, with my core group, and this is really the team. Today they have to be behind the scenes, but I'm sure some of you have seen them present at various things. We have a new doctor in the house, that's Dr. Amy Brooks, who first presented on the Circularity Assessment Protocol at the 6th IMDC in 2018. So the concept has been around since then and developed from there. But Urban Ocean really, as you're going to see today, would not have been possible without Taylor Madeline, who has been directing this program and just put in a tremendous effort. But we have folks really on this foundational team, Jenny Mathis and Catherine Youngblood, and then a cadre of master's students and undergraduate students who participate in the lab. And I'm really just lucky to have such a great team. So let's back up for 1 minute. Last year, and I can't believe it was last year, it seems like it was many years ago, this cover of Science was on plastic pollution. And I can tell you that 20 years ago, the first person I told that I wanted to study this issue, it wasn't even called plastic pollution, said nobody cares about that. So that has really, really changed. And the fact that there were 2 papers that were published that were parallel studies, so done independently within the Science magazine, showing us that, yes, we had heard about this issue and people had become more aware, we're taking some action, but what we're doing is not enough. We need to be more aggressive. And this is one of the papers led by Steph Burrell, as a international working group that I was able to participate in that really shows that if we don't take more action than we already are, we could end up the 11 million metric tons entering our aquatic systems could be 20 to 53 million metric tons, a year. So by 2030. So really thinking about our entire systems and where we can intervene. And to me, coming as an environmental engineer, the roots of that are really our cities, our urban systems. And that's how sort of my role in this came to be. But thinking about how we address this issue, we know it's just not one thing that we need to do. It's really an integrated approach across the entire value chain for plastic. So this is all the way from, do we need to use as much plastic as we are? How can we reduce? How can we get products to people without producing waste? Can we look at innovative design, different product design, various materials? Can we look at improving our infrastructure? And by that, it doesn't necessarily mean it looks the same all over the world, but how can we better collect, capture, and contain our waste in the right context for everybody around the world? And then including at the end, if we do end up with some leakage, capturing that leakage before it gets to the ocean, and this is how we can hopefully get near zero inputs. But one key component is collecting data, and especially on what is leaking out, because that means that's a part of the system that is not working. The interesting thing about CAP is that, and CAP is what we call the Circularity Assessment Protocol for short, is that it studies what is working, not just what isn't working. But you'll see us focus a lot on this leakage component today across all 5 cities. So what is CAP? So CAP is a hub and spoke model. There's 7 spokes. This really came to be when we started talking about these integrated and larger solutions to plastic pollution and the marine debris issue. And the circular economy was presented, and it sounded really, like this is a great holistic picture that will help address this issue. But I wasn't sure how that really translated to, actions on the ground. And as I was traveling with the State Department, I would meet with cities and communities, and they would say, okay, great, Jenna, now we know about this issue, but what should we do about this? And I said, well, you're the expert in your space, you're the expert in your city, but let's look around at some different components and see what kind of data we can get to help inform your decision making as you move forward. And for more information and for the reports that will be published on this, you can go to the circularityinformatics.org site. So a little bit more detail about this larger system. So we're looking at cities as complex system, these 7 components. In terms of input, we're looking at what packaging, what materials, and we focus on plastic packaging within the systems right now because that's the material of interest, but this could be for any material. What are sold in the community? What are the most popular items? Where do they originate? We talk to people in the community. Many, many, many interviews were done as a part of this work to get people's perspective, what they feel about this issue, what they see as the problems and obstacles are to addressing this issue. Product design, how are things packaged, and what are the materials that are most commonly used? And then we look at use versus reuse. We know that sort of historically there's been a lot of reuse in our world, but that has really gone to where we see a lot of single-use items. But some communities do have some great reuse programs, and so we're looking at that. And that reduces waste generation in the first place. We look at collection and end of cycle, so that's sort of the waste management system split up into 2 components. And then finally, this leakage, what ends up in the environment, and what can that tell us about what we can do upstream to prevent that from happening in the first place. So here are the regions of the world that the cohort was first focusing on. So we've got South and Southeast Asia, South and Central America. And so you're going to see the cities that we focused on. And then I guess you heard during COVID, we could not travel. So usually we work with local partners as a part of each CAP. Really, the CAP is done because a city wants it to happen, right? This is not something that we impose. As I said, they asked, what can we do? So we want to collaboratively collect this data together, but our local implementation partners in COVID became absolutely critical. They are the ones that did this work, and we were able to virtually train them and virtually be a part of the process, but we could not be there. So our local implementation partners in Semarang, Indonesia, Melaka, Malaysia, Kanto, Vietnam, Panama City, Panama, and Pune, India became critical to this process. So overall, so for those 5 cities and those 5 countries, what are sort of by the numbers? How did this really look? Well, there was over 24,000 litter items documented across the board, over 1,000 convenience products sampled, and I'll give you some of those results in a second, 366 to-go items sampled, 128 stakeholder interviews. I said there was a lot of interviews, and 118 restaurants and food vendors were sampled as well. And so, again, this is all those 7 components. How do we spread out around the city? Well, these are some mosaics. These are basically our 5 cities. And how we sort of make a grid so that we can randomly sample different locations. And we look at population count to spread out, and that is really not necessarily population density where people live, but this is where people go. This is where our societal activities are happening. And we split that up into 3 ranges so that we can go ahead and get a nice cross section. So we get different land uses. We look at sampling transect methods. So here you can see those small yellow squares are actually where we collect the leakage data. And then within those larger red squares is where we collect the input or the store and the restaurant data. And so we're really characterizing on a 1 kilometer scale in terms of our data collection across a 10 by 10 kilometer area of each city. So I'm going to switch to a few results from each of the spokes. So as far as input goes, we mentioned about where products originate. And the reason we want to look at that is because who needs to be at the table? We know that we want our community members. We know the government is involved, but what are the most popular products that are sold within the community? So as I mentioned, all of those stores were sampled, and all of the most popular items were purchased, not only to look at packaging and materials, but the brands and where are they from. So the solid colors here, I know this is kind of a busy chart, but we looked at where products were manufactured and where the parent companies are from. As you can see in general, the parent companies are the hashed columns, and they are much further away. So these are the median values of all of these products. And then you can also see how close by some of the parent companies and manufacturing is. In general, manufacturing is fairly close by. And so these are the people that you could engage if you were talking about product design or challenges within the waste management system. This is who you could engage in those discussions. And I think it's quite promising when you see that some of these are close by, which means they could be fairly local entities. And of course, individual data points, you can explore that in terms of who to engage and have at those tables. So in terms of packaging, this is, again, a lot of data, but sort of big picture here. So these are convenience items. You can see the majority are packaged in multi-layer plastic film. We know that those are a challenge in the recycling system. So it's hard because they're a combination of materials, so recycling is challenging. Film tends to blow and sort of easily leak out into our environment, even if someone's trying to manage it properly. And so that is also oftentimes what we see on the ground. You can also see PET, which is quite, this is your beverage bottles, right? So your bottles made of PET is a fairly large percentage in a lot of these, and that's quite recyclable. And so this begins this discussion within the communities about what is being procured, what is ending up in the stores and in people's hands. It also tells us, again, what's working well when we compare these numbers and these data to the leakage, and what's not working so well. These are the to-go items from restaurants. So similarly, you can see some of the data here, and some of them we have quite recyclable materials that are valuable, like PET. A lot more of this is rigid plastic, which tends to have more value than film-based plastic, but PP, polypropylene, has a bit less value typically than PET and some of the metals that you see here. But in some, you still see paper and wood being used, and so this is where we can start to talk about some of those alternative materials and what might work locally. As I mentioned, lots of interviews, 128 interviews, such incredible perspective shared and information. In general, people don't even necessarily agree that this is an issue, and I think that's, that's kind of where you want to start. Do you think this is a problem in your community? And there's not necessarily always agreement on that. But I think in general, people do recognize that, and I think in some cases get quite overwhelmed. I think this first quote, that it will take multi-generation efforts to deal with plastic in a way that we can track every piece of plastic and bring it back to the circular economy, is quite telling in terms of what people think. But I think participating in this program, collecting this kind of data, is one big step forward. What we also saw a lot were people thinking about that next generation. So really invigorated by the younger generation and students thinking about this issue. We also talked to a lot of informal recycling, informal waste management people, waste collectors, and really got a good perspective, I think, from people on sort of the informal sector and how that can interplay. And then a lot of business owners. I think here you can kind of see a hotel was trying to make an effort and really just kind of saying it depends upon, who the customers are, and the customers still want plastic. They find it to be the most convenient. And so even if they want to switch over, if they don't have plastic, people tend to get upset. And so they still need to provide that as well. Here's a few photos. I think this is really, we documented everything with photographic surveys. Of course, our partners on the ground did this. And so these are just examples of collection mechanisms. Again, sort of all the same concept, but you can see the variety and differences and the way that there's commonality for these cities to discuss amongst each other, yet there's also differences in terms of how people approach things. And so I think this really illustrates sort of the whole concept of collecting this data at the individual city level and then sharing it across. So now I'm going to get into the leakage component and a bit more here in terms of what are the materials that we actually found in the environment. And so I think here you can see both food, plastic, and tobacco products are sort of number 1 and number 2 sort of across the board. And also plastic fragments in some cases. And these are exactly what you see usually on global studies, right? The International Coastal Cleanup, started by Ocean Conservancy over 35 years ago, shows this same kind of data, which is interesting because that's oftentimes coastal and beach areas. And again, we're looking at inside these urban systems. So we are seeing some similarities there. When we combine them all together, number 1 is food plastic, so it's those wrappers and snack items that we were talking about. Number 2 is tobacco products. Number 3 is paper, and that thinking about when we're talking about alternatives, even though something may biodegrade like paper, we still don't want it ending up in the environment. So managing all of this waste properly is important, and then seeing plastic fragments in the top. And these are by item count, just so people are aware. So because we use a transect method and cover 100 square meters per transect within each sample zone, we have a litter density, and it's very consistent in terms of how we collect the data. So these can be compared. You can see that the most frequent concentration or density of litter that we see is in between 1/2 to 0.7 items per square meter. And again, we're looking at, this is not like a blanket of litter on the ground within those squares. These are pathways. So these are sort of like what we call litter aggregation pathways, so we can see what is leaking out. But in generally, this is skewed to the left. So it's lower concentrations, but there are a few areas where the litter density gets quite a bit higher. But this is very interesting to see where these urban ocean cities fall, and then beyond that to where we have more litter densities across the world for comparison. Also comparing the litter densities just from each city, and also in the low, mid, and high population count areas. You can see that in some cases, the high population count area has the highest litter density, and in some it doesn't. And there's various influencing factors and some good papers that have been come out lately. One is Schuler that just came out this year, talking about how infrastructure, of course, has an influence on this as well. So in maybe low population, you don't tend to have the economy of scale that you would have with collection. And so that can be a challenge. And so you can see litter density go up. We observe this as well in our Sea to Source expedition along the Ganges River. So various influencing factors here, but you can see the differences between litter densities, and our Southeast Asia communities are a little bit lower than what we saw in South and Central America. So here are the top items. Cigarettes were at the top for 3 of our cities, and then tobacco sachets. So again, you'll see the tobacco products. But in Panama City, we saw fragments really at the top. So that means the plastic there has been quite weathered. And already has tended to fragment, and then food wrappers hitting the top. So here's a summary of all of this. So really in all 5 cities, we saw cigarettes and plastic food wrappers within the top 5, and then some notes in the top 10. All of them had straws in the top 10, except for Pune, and then all of them had hard plastic fragments in the top 10, except for Kanto, and then paper, except for Panama City. So some interesting trends there. So what does this all mean? I mean, we could dive into the data from each city. There's so much there. I really encourage you to look at the reports that will be posted. I think we'll put the link in the chat or posted shortly. So anyway, so let's just talk about some commonalities. These are going to be a little bit zoomed out so that we can start this discussion. But what we saw for common challenges are top convenience items. So again, those chip and candy products and wrappers, they're largely made of this multi-layer plastic film. We showed that data, and that's challenging because don't have value in the recycled market. We want to look at tailored solutions to address these items, that especially the multi-layer film packaging, the tobacco items. Can we think about reduction alternatives and ways to add value? Single-use and plastic-to-go items, they are consistently cheaper and more convenient. As you saw that quote from the hotel who said we still need to offer that. That's what consumers want and expect. So also thinking about the demand, there are demand in many of these places for programs that would get young and tech-savvy locals engaged in the waste sector. In several cities, the folks that are working within the waste sector are should be retiring soon, and they say, who's going to take this on? Who's going to take this over? So can we make this a place where in some cities people have wanted to join, but where can we make that across the board where we can get some of that innovation and tech into the space? And then really looking at physical space, capacity, technology, and person power for the waste management system as it exists and as it needs to expand. And I think this is going to be a challenge, and you're going to see it again, an opportunity, acknowledgement of the importance of the informal sector, but not always sure how to be inclusive and expand the infrastructure where they're involved. And in several cities, landfills are filling up. So really looking at that reduction component and diversion from these landfills, and or figuring out how to manage waste better. So what are some common strengths? As I mentioned, a lot of the products are manufactured, and even some of the parent companies are domestic. That really opens up opportunities for talking about design and delivery of products, and even discussions about extended producer responsibility. Innovations to maximize collection. So again, the informal sector exists in all of these cities. And in some cases, there are really great examples of how their collaborations have opened up to expand the infrastructure and have the quasi-formal and formal sections. So we've got small and enthusiastic groups that are looking at refill and reuse, avoiding waste in the first place, bulk stores, alternative delivery options for products. So those could be scaled. They do have an energized younger generation, as I said. You can see these are sort of opposites of some of the challenges. And so that younger generation really wants to make a difference in this space. There's a lot of historical context around reusables, right? So this hasn't been so long that they've relied on single-use plastics. And so getting back to those spaces, but using technology maybe to make it more convenient for people now. There are, in a lot of cases, national, regional, and even local policies and strategies in place. I think implementation in some cases has been a challenge. And so people are talking about how can we get everybody on board and make sure we implement and enforce some of these. And also awareness campaigns, really thinking about source segregation. So that's a theme throughout a lot of this, and there's a lot of great ideas on how to get people more aware and trained, or I guess learning about the importance of source segregation. And so that sort of leads me to the last two here. So this is where I want to leave it and pass it over to the amazing local implementation partner that we worked with in Pune, India, and hear the perspectives from the cities who are really the folks taking this forward. Just appreciate everybody listening, and we're more than happy to answer questions and look for the reports coming soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. That was a lot of information delivered extremely efficiently. So one of the things that Jenna highlighted is the key role that was played by the local implementing partners. And so now I want to turn it over to Sanskriti Menon, Senior Program Director of the Center for Environment Education. So Sanskriti is a Senior Program Director at CEE, leading the CEE Urban Program and the CEE Coast and Marine Program. CEE, the Center for Environment Education, is a national institute set up in 1984 as a center of excellence of the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change. So Sanskriti leads a team of about 30 at the CEE offices in Goa and Chhattisgarh MP and Maharashtra for school-based environmental education, education for biodiversity conservation, urban issues like transportation and waste, and participatory guidance. She has been a convener of the Board of Studies of Environment Education of the Maharashtra HSC Board. She has experience with designing and implementing a range of programs for public education, citizens engagement, multi-stakeholder deliberation, et cetera, which means she's the perfect partner for Urban Ocean, using a range of communication tools. Projects she has led include public engagement for a bus rapid transit system, for preparation of a bicycle plan, inhabiting and anchoring a network of NGOs on sustainable mobility, setting up a citizenship and environment education center as a public facility, a nature education center, arranging for public consultations for a master plan, for policy formulation, et cetera. Sanskriti has an MSc in Museum Studies and an MA in Sustainable Development. She's currently a doctoral candidate in the area of participatory democracy with Curtin University, Perth. Sanskriti, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. And coming from this environmental education and education for sustainable development background, it was especially valuable for us to be able to participate in the Circularity Assessment Protocol. And it was really a great opportunity and a great learning experience. And Dr. Jenna, thank you so much for the presentation itself was really insightful. And so it was almost about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, that we got involved in this initiative. And Dr. Jenna and Taylor met with the CE team and provided us the orientation, which were interspersed with us trying out the tools and trying out the transects with the Marine Debris Tracker app in last October. And it was quite simple and fun to use. And then we had a similar orientation amongst our field team. And we used the CAP tools with a team of field surveyors for about 2 months, and they explored in all those little squares that we were, that was the protocol, that you conduct the transact walks here and do the surveys of the convenience stores and the grocery stores. And also a number of interviews with the entrepreneurs and different types of waste workers in the waste value chain and researchers. And we were able to connect with people who've been in the sector for quite some time. I mean, the municipal corporation, of course, and Swatch, which is the cooperative of waste collectors in Pune. And it is amongst the finest examples of informal sector integration in waste collection that you would see across the world. And it was really good to have detailed interactions with both these entities, as well as with several other entrepreneurs, because we also found that there are entrepreneurs, or there are in fact some people who we encountered in the transects and in the interviews, who shifted into waste collection and retrieving of recyclables during the COVID time. And we couldn't really follow this this particular line of who moved into the labor of collection of recyclables, but I think that might be also an area of investigation for the future. It may be transient for now, but I think the learning is that also that people think that recovery of recyclables and the waste sector is has a relatively low entry bar, but actually it can be quite competitive. I mean, there was a whole host of learnings that we were able to get from this, really dispersed engagement across the city. And I think the protocol helps you do that and not just go to certain convenient places, but actually spread out in mix of localities. And in terms of what we learned, I think a lot of that was already shared by Dr. Jenna, but I think it helped us as an organization to have this occasion for a deeper thinking about sustainable production and consumption. And really, it's such a veritable wash of products and their packaging that flows into the city and into our lives. And looking at the sort of evidence-based method of understanding what's happening with all these products and the packaging, it has helped in clarifying the directions of change. And I think it was quite revealing to note that there are 2 or 3 big items. In the pie charts there was like tobacco products, and strangely, as Dr. Jenna pointed out, no straws in the litter. And I should really try and find out what led to that change happening. And I think that may be quite revealing into how have stores and beverage suppliers actually shifted into maybe providing paper straws. I think it generated a lot of interest in the further engagement with the ecosystem of innovators and actors. And all the 25-30 interviews that we did, people spoke about alternatives and the barriers and the challenges that they face. And several mentioned the need for incentives. And others spoke about, how convenience and cost are key determinants of behavior. And I think another thing that did come up, as Dr. Jenna was also pointing out, that it's this generation. I mean, just 25-30 years ago, we weren't using these types of materials. It's almost also like the field of mobility, that 25-30 years ago, we weren't using so many bikes and cars, but today our streets are filled with congestion with these things. And how is it that in this generation, we've gone from from a different sort of life to a life which is full of these kinds of issues? And what does it take to really innovate with newer solutions which are relevant for our times? And looking at the range of solutions, I think one could look at the responsible production and the design and the packaging sphere, looking at EPR opportunities, extended producer responsibility or corporate social responsibility, of all of which are big in India as well, and seeing how as a city and as individuals and communities we are able to connect. They seem a little distant, but we have to figure out how we can do that. But of great interest, I think, is this responsible consumption and responsible waste management practice. I mean, there are people buying from organic produce stores without packaging, or taking their own bag and containers and using personal hygiene products that avoid waste, or doing home composting and urban gardening. And there's, I think, a lot of interest as well, and a lot of engagement possibility there, which could be harnessed for the larger systemic change that one desires. And then, of course, the great insights that people who work with the materials and wastes have, and the whole set of solutions in the efficient retrieval of materials and the processing. And I think both with Swatch, the waste collectors cooperative in Pune, and the Pune Municipal Corporation, they've tried a number of different really innovative solutions. I mean, of course, biomethanation, but also there's protoprint, which is looking at making 3D printer filament with the researcher from the MIT, who's from Pune. There's also Red Dot, which is looking at the recovery of super absorbent polymer through sanitary products. There's polystyrene recovery. There's PET bottles recovery and multi-layer plastic through this EPR, extended producer responsibility arrangement. So there are new things which are happening with materials and with the different types of stakeholders coming in to do the partnerships. And I think the greatest types of interesting partnerships would be the solutions which lie at the intersection of producers, consumers coming together, and shortening supply chains and product miles and storage and retail systems and materials recovery, which could be facilitated by ICT approaches and really engagement approaches. Because and I think this would be the ideas that we would really look forward to taking in the next phase of exploring these opportunities, and really look at the human engagement in the development of the solutions. I mean, people talk about the IPCC code red, and there's a fear factor, as there should be. But as environmental educators, I think fear is not really necessarily a great motivator, and it's not an enabler. Instead, if we can look at approaches like the CAP, it's possible to provide opportunities to engage constructively in problem solving and evidence generation, which gives us better systems understanding, and it's better for everyone. And I think it came up in Dr. Jenna's slide as well, that using CAP with youth and community engagement. So CE has been involved in something called the Tide Turner program with the UNEP, and we were able to engage about 80,000 young people over the course of last year through the pandemic. And with the Foundation for Environmental Education also, which runs the Blue Flag program, people who work with oceans and coasts would know that, and I'm also a board member there. So they run the Eco Schools program, and they have something called the Little S program, which reaches about 56,000 schools in 70 countries. And I think networking these types of initiatives has a lot of potential for positive engagement. And really, we have the saying in CEE that you use these positive actions, which are individually, collectively, and collaboratively, which become especially valuable. And these positive actions we call the handprint approaches. And we say that we all need to increase our handprint and reduce our footprint. So I'll stop there. It was truly nice for us and really educative for us to be involved, and we really hope to develop the approaches further. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very rich presentation, and it's clear that this sparked a lot of ideas and thinking. So thank you, Sanskriti. And now, really, to tie it all together, I'm delighted to introduce Mahesh Harhare, Chief Resilience Officer from Pune, India. And before I go through his bio, I just want to note that Pune is kind of special in the Urban Ocean program, because it is the one city that is both a learning city and a mentor city. And that's really a reflection of something that Jenna and Sanskriti both mentioned, which is the role of the informal sector in waste management. And some of the things that Pune has done have been incredibly creative and interesting. So Mahesh has over 15 years experience working in Indian cities in the fields of urban management and urban governance, including policy and strategy, city infrastructure and investment assessment, institutional assessment, project feasibility and development, and transaction advisory. So throughout his career, Mahesh has worked on key urban sector related assignments supported by external funding, such as ADB, IFC, GIZ, USAID, and BMG, various state governments, and over 40 urban local bodies in India. He has demonstrated leadership skills at the national, state, and local levels. Mahesh's work on key assignments in the urban water and sanitation sectors include developing city sanitation plans for GIZ, developing public-private partnership projects in the urban water and wastewater recycling sector for ADB, and creating city development plans for 25 cities and a feasibility assessment for waste energy plant for BMGF in India. Mahesh holds an MTech in a Master's of Technology in Urban Planning and studied civil engineering. He is currently enrolled in an executive program in management at IIM Calcutta. So Mahesh, tell us, bring us home.
Thank you for the nice introduction. I would like to share my screen so that I can talk with some numbers. Can you see my screen? Hello everyone. I think the stage is all set. You got a lot of information and also analysis, which Dr. Jenna and then Sanskruti added in terms of what is happening on ground. So I would like to highlight specific things about Pune and how we are trying to take this study forward, how we are using this CAP tool and then the findings and taking it forward. So this is just giving you a larger picture in terms of size, what kind of a size we are looking at in terms of waste management in Pune. The city generates something around 2,000 metric tons per day. So you can imagine the scale of the problem we have. And almost 90% of that waste is collected and processed in different plants. So those are dry waste processing plants, wet waste processing plants, and some places the mixed waste is received, and then there is a recycling also happening. So there are plants which are formally recycled, and there is a mechanism also where there is informal recycling happening. So there are different problems and challenges on ground where you can look at different sets of areas and also the types of waste which is coming to the city. So when we talk about the plastic waste or the related aspect, it's not an isolated problem or a challenge. You need to look at it in a holistic way. That's why I will present this slide so that you get the scale of the problem which it is facing. So Dr. Jenna talked about the hub and spoke model where we are looking at basically the 7 spokes, and those are very critical. Unfortunately, what happens is when you look at the institutional structure we have, for example, Pune Municipal Corporation, they may not be able to basically control all these 7 aspects. For example, the input side, where a lot of it depends on the companies, and then the industry side, where the city may have a very limited control, but obviously city can always look for the end of the product, where the product is used, and then how to do the recycling and how to promote that. And one of the analysis which we got from the CAP, you have already seen, is that tobacco products and food plastic are the major ones, which are basically having almost like 40 to 45% share. So that is a critical problem when you look at the scale of the problem and also the different actors which are working. It is not only the Pune Municipal Corporation, there are around 6-7 organizations or government bodies at a state level and a city level which are working around. So through the CAP study, we looked at from these different 7 dimensions and came out with different recommendations through the CAP study. And this is the summary of 4 or 5 recommendations which are very critical. One is obviously we are talking about extended producer responsibility, since a lot of this plastic waste or the littering which is happening is either related to the local companies or related to the national level companies, at least in case of Pune, unlike other cities where it is going beyond the national boundary. So that is a very critical area when a city is looking for integrated solution, where city itself may not be able to basically manage that, but they will definitely require EPR kind of a arrangement where they can bring in the top brands into picture and then work out an arrangement. Second is obviously improving communication and transparency. And also awareness campaign. So awareness campaign is basically required, as Sanskruti has mentioned, not only within the citizens, but also between the business owners and then the manufacturers and producers, so that there are different alternatives can be worked out. A source segregation can happen, as Dr. Jenna mentioned in her presentation, that source segregation is also critical. And given the scale of the problem, you cannot ignore the wet waste also in case of Pune, because many times what happens, it's not segregated at source, and then it creates a problem, even pulling out plastic or paper from that particular waste. Obviously, use of biodegradable paper, which is coming up. There are different alternatives coming up, especially for straws. The alternatives are coming up. That's why we are seeing that lesser number of straws are there in the litter. But still, there are other challenges related to other products where a lot of plastic or the multi-layer plastic is used. So there also the challenge, that particular challenge need to be addressed. And above and all this, there's organic waste, e-waste, and plastic waste that need to be considered together, because as I mentioned, source segregation may not be happening at a particular scale, which is feasible at the city level or at a local level. Even in case of e-waste, there is some plastic part involved in that which may not have a recyclable value. So one need to look at that aspect. So we looked at all these recommendations. There are more recommendations as well. We also looked at what city is planning. There are more than 20 processing facilities for wet waste and dry waste. there is a special arrangement with Swachh Cooperative where they are connected with the recyclers, and a lot of recycling is happening, especially for paper, and more than 20 to 30 types of plastic waste that is happening. But still the problem is growing. The city limits are also expanded. Recently the city has gone up from around 450 square kilometer to 510 square kilometer. So you can imagine the scale of the problem. The amount of waste which is generated can go up from 2000 metric ton to 2500 metric ton in some days. So we are using this opportunity. So during the CAP study, we had a preparation forum, then we carried out this CAP assessment. So we are taking this these recommendations forward and then working out on the opportunity assessment. So what we have done is we have worked out a list of opportunities which city can take up. Those are not particularly related to plastic waste only. We are also focusing on wet waste and other parts where city already has an infrastructure. So I will come to those opportunities. And once those opportunities are finalized, we will do the project design specific to those opportunities, 6-7 opportunities. And then there will be an accelerator program where there will be matching between the funders and the city requirement, where the project which will happen. And then there will be discussion between the funders and the city officials on how to take these projects forward, considering the overall circularity. So we have seen that although the plastic waste may form a very small part, let's say 10% of the overall waste, but still it's a major problem, considering that it can go into your water bodies, which is the case with Pune also. Pune has around 45-kilometer network of river. So in that case, what we thought was that having a data and then using that data for better decision making is very critical in case of Pune. Currently, city captures data. The data is captured up to a processing site level and up to the secondary collection level. But still, there are 3,000 points, 3,000 pickup points where the Swachh organization or the representative from Swachh, they deliver the waste collected from 200 to 250 household per Swachh worker. So how to capture that data and how to bring that data to the decision maker so that you can have a micro level plan to basically manage the recyclable waste. So that is very critical, and this is one of the critical or important opportunity. And there are other opportunities like having awareness campaign and involving people and especially youth in that. That is also very important. The informal sector plays very important role in recycling, as we have seen and in case of India and other cities also. So it is closely linked with the ICT-based monitoring and also bringing the informal sectors and also linking it to the extended producer responsibility, that EPR. Because what happens is all these players which are working in informal sector, they may not be aware about the documentation work involved in EPR case. So they may skip the entire value chain and then they sell it informally to some other places where they may not get the required amount of revenue, and also it may not be environmentally sustainable to have that kind of a recycling. So what we are trying to do is basically how to bring in the EPR modality and mechanism and can reach out to this informal sector, because there are some regulatory hurdles as well. So the Pollution Control Board requires certain preconditions to basically have an informal sector converted to the formal recycler. So that is also a major hurdle considering this. So we think that formalization of cities informal sector recycler is also critical, and how to link them to EPR so that we can get a benefit of the EPR. At the same time, we can have assured revenue and security to these people. So I think these 2-3 important opportunities are there which are directly linked to plastic waste management and also the recycling part. Apart from that, considering the integrated waste management, city has around 25 decentralized organic waste management plants, which are basically biomethanation plants. But 10 to 12 plants are very old, more than 10 years old. So we are looking at basically refurbishing them and looking at expansion of their capacity from 5 metric ton to 15 metric ton as the waste generation is also increasing. So city is looking at it in a comprehensive manner, and also some specialized treatment facilities, as Sanskruti mentioned about how to deal with the sanitary napkins, how to treat and process them in a scientific and hygienic way, and also look at e-waste where you can have a common platform where the e-waste recyclers can come on board, and so that the value creation is there, because already there is a demand for recycling of e-waste. So all these solutions are emerging from the CAP study, or they are actually helping us in getting the baseline data in terms of understanding what are the specific problems we need to address that. And we are working on these opportunities so that the sustainable development goals can also be achieved. And we will take these opportunities forward with the funders and the donor agencies and try to work out with the city to basically implement it in the next phase. Thank you. Over to you, Sir.
Thank you, Mahesh. As I said, this has been a very rich discussion. So maybe I'll kick off the discussion amongst the panelists. For the audience, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A, and hopefully we will have time to address a few questions from the audience. So I guess my first question is really to start with Mahesh, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the panelists. Was there anything from the CAP results that surprised you or anything that you didn't expect? So I'd love to hear any thoughts about that, because the whole idea behind this is to surface what's really happening on the ground.
Yeah, one observation I would like to highlight first, that the city officials told me that this is a very unique approach. They found it because generally what happens, we have a larger city, larger population. So many times we don't go up to that micro level, but the grid-based approach which the CAP team has adopted, which was very useful, and that city found that it was very unique and useful. That is the first observation. Second was obviously related to the tobacco products. So city officials were also surprised that this has come out as a major, what you can say, the contributor for the overall littering, what is happening. And I think that is the main area where city should look at, because those are the smaller sachet which cannot be controlled at a larger scale. So that needs a micro level plan, and a lot of awareness also is required at a local level.
The tobacco products were an insight for me as well. Any of the other panelists, would you like to share anything that surprised you that came out of the CAP reports? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I can add something. I think what really, I don't know that it surprised me so much, but I was just really kind of excited as an opportunity, I think, with a lot of the cities on how localized everything was. And I don't know, you know, being in the US where things travel large distances, and it's not like, you know, a lot of the parent companies were far, but a lot of the manufacturing, recycling, processing, all of that is fairly domestic and even localized in these cities, which means to me, there's a huge opportunity, and probably even they are closer to becoming more circular than some of our situations in the US, where we rely on, you know, outsourcing and exporting and, you know, things traveling quite far, either as an input or as an output of our waste. And so to me, that's just a real, you know, step ahead and opportunity, I think, for learning and sharing knowledge amongst all of us.
Eleanor Sanskriti, or should I ask another question? I just want to make sure you have a chance. So my next question, I wanted to get at this point that Sanskriti raised about sort of innovations and new developments, new technologies, new ideas, and the fact that these are sort of emerging in these places. And I think maybe I'll start with Ellen here, because that's really the focus of what you guys do. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how you work with entrepreneurs and how you could see perhaps this sort of unfolding over in the future.
Yeah, terrific. So the Circularity Initiative helped to create a program called the Incubation Network, where we are focused on building an innovation ecosystem around waste management and recycling to address the ocean plastic issue. So, you know, something like the CAP assessment findings are really kind of foundational to being in.
Oh, technology. So I think we've lost Ellen temporarily, or maybe we've lost me. I can't tell. If you can hear me, could you, one of the panelists, raise their hand? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We lost Ellen. Sorry.
Ellen?
Oh, there she is.
I think you're on mute, Ellen.
Ellen, we lost your voice. Oh.
Okay. I'll move on to, actually, first I'll see if anyone else wants to address that question, technology. And if not, I will move on to my next question on the technology. Jenna, because you work at the New Materials Institute. Ellen, I will come back to you. It's clearly that kind of a day. I wanted to ask Jenna to address it, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely we're seeing exciting things, and what I think, again, sharing across these cities, in some cases, people are saying, oh, we need the next generation involved, and in others are like, wow, we've got this really energized, youth that has these cool ideas. And I say to the students at the university, I'm like, you're the one who's going to think of, how can we decouple waste generation from economic growth? How can we think differently about this? And because of the incubation network and the fact that this data is actually feeding a process, hopefully engaging and inspiring people within the communities, whether they need to incubate that entrepreneur community or grow it or start it even. I think that's all, we see all that happening, and it's very exciting, and so grateful to you and TCI for taking this forward. So hopefully Ellen can add more.
Yeah, sorry, Ellen, back to you. Let's try again.
Amazing. I have no idea where I dropped off, but I liked what Jenna said, and I definitely agree. And what's really interesting about the way we think about, innovation and incubating innovation in the ecosystem is that it can come from different sectors, right? The innovation can happen within government as well as within the private sector. And I think that has a real opportunity for the two to play against each other. So, if I'm an entrepreneur with a new solution for collecting and recovering waste that has already been littered in the environment, my work is only enhanced with support from government to play a role in behavior change campaigns and public education around these issues, because the two can't work in isolation. And I think we're really excited to see what comes from this shared understanding of what the challenges and opportunities are, and then engaging with different individuals and organizations in the community to actually solve the problems in different ways together.
Sanskriti, you mentioned a lot of pretty exciting innovations and new ideas coming out of Pune. Did you want to add anything there?
No, I would just like to say that it's really encouraging to hear about, the possibility of incubation, because I think people, when they're working, trying to innovate with something, it would really be nice to have a connect with quite a large, set of minds, and think about how things can be tried out and scaled up. And I think there's no reason to stay, limited to when there is such a good family of people working and innovating and trying to support and scale up too. Yeah. And if it's possible to integrate that in the next phase, I really look forward to that. In fact, I want to also mention that there is a Sustainathon which is currently happening in Pune, which is led by the TCS and with Swatch and PMC and others. And that's actually the purpose is to generate innovation from young minds, undergraduate and postgraduate students. So let's see if something comes out of it. We could just link it up to the next phases here too.
Mahesh, did you want to add anything? I have one more question, and then I'm going to take a few from the audience.
Yeah, so I would like to highlight one point that already there is some innovation happening on ground, where I think one of the startups or the entrepreneurs which is supported by Circularity Capital is working with Pune in the EPR space, where they are helping them, basically the recyclers, in getting the help through EPR mechanisms. So that is happening already.
So one last, using the moderator's prerogative, one last thread I'd like to pull on that came up in some of the presentations was the informal sector. And as I mentioned, Pune is unique in the sense that is a learning and a mentor city because of its role with the informal sector. And I noticed in your presentation, Mahesh, that you talked a lot about how to connect the informal sector with EPR. So I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts about how the informal sector might be empowered and how they might be brought in to be part of the solution, as we're already seeing in Pune. So maybe Mahesh, I'll start with you and then open it up to the other panelists.
Yeah, so this is very critical. So as I highlighted, one waste worker collects waste from almost like 200 to 300 households, and then they transfer that waste to a particular transfer point. So there are around 3,000 transfer points. From those transfer points, the waste goes through the transport vehicles, and then it goes to the processing site. So currently, city collects data at a processing site and the secondary transportation at vehicle, but at those 3,000 points, the particular data on a daily basis is not gathered and is not analyzed in a detailed manner. Once we do that through a dashboard or through a particular mechanism using the ICT, that will give a lot of data and analytics which can be supported in decision making in terms of addressing a particular area and a particular type of a product or a material, and then the recycling industry can be strengthened accordingly. Right now what is happening is we are 2 stages behind basically the recycling, overall recycling work. So once we do that, it will be really helpful to basically do the micro level planning.
Thank you. I'd like to open up to the rest of the panel because I felt like this came up in almost every presentation.
Yeah, I could just add, I couldn't agree more with what Mahesh has said. And one of the areas of work that the Circularity Initiative is trying to work on and through the Incubation Network program is to understand the connection between how we can focus on models that are more inclusive, that work to improve livelihoods of informal waste workers, give them more protections and opportunities, and make sure that those models also lead and demonstrate how those models lead to improved collection and recovery and recycling of material. The connection of preventing leakage and improving livelihoods, I think, is really critical for us to understand as we think about how we actually build models that can scale and serve the community in more ways. You know, if we only focus on reducing plastic leakage, we sort of miss the bigger picture in terms of impact and what we could be achieving.
Yeah, I think, Ellen, that's great. I couldn't agree more. And I think what we're seeing on the ground in the leakage, so like to focus on that data for a minute, is that you didn't hear me say plastic bottles, beverage bottles, in any of those top items, right? But in the US, we just finished a big data collection and bottles are in the top 5 typically. And so what we're seeing, and I think it's not well documented, right? I mean, we often think, well, there's all this, you know, mismanaged waste and leakage here, but it's really not everything. And the informal sector is doing so much in conditions that are typically not conducive to being able to work in really hard conditions. And I think even the relationship to some leakage and, you know, particularly even some of the work that they are trying to do, but don't really have either physical space, support from the formal societal system, means that it can't be done to the efficiency that it could be. So again, I don't think you don't need to reinvent the wheel, and Pune has done an incredible job of integrating the informal sector. They are already doing so much. And so how do you, bring that into a system where it is recognized for what it's doing? Because it's clearly there in the data, right? What we're not seeing on the ground is being used and recycled within these urban systems. And so I think that that's quite evident, and we need to figure out how to support them and make them part of the system.
Sanskriti, please.
Yeah, I want to say that, there is work to be done at the front end of waste collection, as well as up the value chain of recovery and recycling. And, we've had discussions which also talk about the need to create scrap markets, which take on the aggregation and pre-processing, because all of that also happens in, with great the conditions of work are not that good at all. And I think it's both at the front end and the aggregation points and the scrap markets, and plain, simple support for the workers and the micro enterprises, the small units of scrap management also need support.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. And now I'm going to turn to some of the Q&A. So I see there are a couple in the chat and a couple in the Q&A. So I'll try to capture as many as I can. Keep them coming. So one question here is, have you been able to quantify the plastics related to tourists and hospitality in these efforts? And how is policy and partnership in that sector being advanced? I don't know if anybody wants to take that question on.
Well, I can start, and then anyone else could chime in. But so when we have an initial meeting with a city, we talk about are there certain sectors that are important here that we need to specifically focus on, and we'll either add a set of interviews or even add potential, sampling areas as needed, and whether that be a physical space like a coastline or an important landmark site, or a sector like tourism, fishing, et cetera. And so specifically, that has been the case. And so we've interviewed hotels, sometimes, other, folks related to the tourism sector, whatever it may be, maritime, if that's the case. So anyway, we easily, add that to the CAP and to our interview process to explore those specific either opportunities or barriers within that system. And so I think Semarang was one where we did interviews, and both not only sort of tourism, but also a transient, commuting population is what came up in Semarang. I remember people coming into the city daily. So tourists, some, yes, but also just people coming into the city. So there's challenges specifically there, because if people don't live there, they don't necessarily have that same sense of ownership maybe, or be as aware of some of the city interworkings. And so that's very similar with tourists who come and go. And so those kind of issues are under discussion based upon the CAP findings.
Thank you, Jenna. Another question, what is the role of national government in regards to restricting tobacco or plastic bags or accelerating the use of bio-friendly products? I don't know if anyone wants to take this question on. I think the CAP is really a local event, or a local process, but I think it'd be useful to see what you think you need from national governments to sort of make your solutions work. So maybe I'll just open up to the panel if anybody wants to offer a comment or a thought. In India, Mahesh, is EPR at the national level or at the regional level? How is EPR administered?
I think it is at the national level, and but the problem here is there is a lot of interstate transport or the value chain which is involved, where you have a distributed sale or the usage compared to a single point manufacturing which is happening. So a lot of times what happens is the manufacturing is in a completely different state, and then the use is in a different state. So a lot of this has challenges in terms of basically collecting the waste or connecting with the different users. So that is a major challenge. Although there are various policies, the national level acts are there in terms of solid waste management, and even state level there is a act to basically ban on single-use plastic. But the implementation, there are challenges. Hardly 60–70% implementation happens, but still there are challenges in terms of covering 100%.
So maybe I'll reframe it, because I see another question in the Q&A that's somewhat similar, which is from the perspective of the local community, what do you need from national governments to sort of support your efforts to create circularity? Because although the CAP is really is about circularity in a community, some of the policy support I think probably has to be national. So we've touched on EPR. Are there any others that maybe you would like to surface in this discussion? I'm thinking of maybe recycled content standards or deposit return schemes or other such things, but I open it to you all for suggestions.
Yeah, so one is the incentivization part, which Sanskruti has mentioned, which is required especially at the informal sector. And what happens is there is a EPR is one set, and then there is a regulatory body which is a pollution control board. which regulates the use of a particular processing site. So one need to have a approval from Pollution Control Board for using a particular site for waste processing. So a lot of time these informal waste processors may not have that qualification, or they do not meet that condition to do the processing officially or in a formal way. So I think that is a major bottleneck. Wherever PMC is involved, Pune Municipal Corporation at large scale waste processing, they do themselves. So Pune Municipal Corporation does the regulatory approval and all for a particular processing site. But for smaller sites, there are many restrictions in terms of you need to have a buffer zone and all, which may not be feasible. Second is the land prices are also very high. So it's not feasible to have the processing at small scale within the city area. So if we can connect the EPR mechanism and route the incentives through that, and then help these processors to come together as an association and then get a kind of a blanket approval for, let's say, a set of 10, 20 processors or association, and the documentation involved in EPR, because a lot of these informal sector processors may not be that educated or may not be well aware about the process involved in documentation for the EPR. So that will help a lot in terms of bringing them together. PMC can facilitate that, but from a regulation point of view and the documentation required for EPR is very critical. So one need to bridge the gap in terms of setting up the mechanism and also facilitating that.
Yeah, I would like to just add that, this is precisely the point that when it's a very micro enterprise and it's in the informal sector, the value add is there, but it's often not recognized, but it's also happening at the cost of the health of the workers. And as we formalize, often it's the really small enterprises, the individual based enterprises who get displaced, because the requirements of documentation and regulatory approval are there. And therefore, the EPR should really, as Mahesh has also mentioned, actually facilitate the bringing together of the informal sector workers so that they don't get displaced. And I think that's pretty critical.
And I would just add a couple of other thoughts. Like, I think the implementation of EPR critically, I think Mahesh mentioned this earlier, the ability to have at the national level a standard data platform is really key if you're going to accurately sort of account for all of the material coming in and being managed. And then, as you mentioned, recycled content, I would extend that to say, government plays a role in procuring and allowing for recycled content to be used in various products and packages that government may be procuring or may be used in others. And so part of the challenge when we think about building markets for recycled plastics especially is, can we get to opening up local markets, and by local I don't mean like individual communities, but sort of across the state or nationwide, where you can use recycled plastic not just for lower value end uses, but also for higher and higher value, so more circular food grade post-consumer recycled content, for example, and legislation that allows for that and regulates that is critically important to create value.
If I may just add, a sort of dream, and when some of us do get together to talk about what should happen in Pune next, it's really this, that the city level incubator, and talking about incubation, which could include EPR actors, include the local actors, the local innovators with the PMC, and it's something that becomes like a research and reference group and is able to host and really track what kind of innovations are coming up and how will they scale out, and provides the place for thinking through, what materials, what do we do with them, what services, how do we avoid waste. But this sort of a common way, a common sort of city level incubation platform, that would be really good to have. And if EPR can also help in that, or CSR can help in that, that would be great.
I was going to ask one more question, but that's almost too good a segue into a wrap up. So I think I'm just going to go into the wrap up, because I wanted to spend a minute or two just talking about what happens now. So it's been a really busy year. As you can see, it's been an incredible effort across a huge number of people all around the world to conduct the CAP in all of these cities. And now it's really moved on to the next phase. We're still in the assessment phase, but now we're looking at the opportunity assessment tool, which is really being led by the Resilient Cities Network. So it's a structured process to convene stakeholders around the CAP findings and to start thinking about what the solutions would be. So I might ask Saurabh if you want to say a couple words about the opportunity assessment tool, and then we can wrap up by talking about the Accelerator Summit.
Sure. Thank you, Sheva, for putting me on the spot. I think I will just mention about what we are going to take steps forward. A big congratulations to Dr. Jenna and Taylor and Kerry from the Ocean Conservancy, who were very much part of this process, along with the cities, along with the local implementation partner on this big release. After the facts and the findings and the data points, we are convening a structured stakeholder engagement with the cities in the series of 3 sessions. And these sessions will help cities to project prioritize, and at the end of these sessions, what we will have are project statements. And these project statements will be further worked for at least by the end of the year, and which will be presented in a pitch format at the Accelerator Summit. Some of the project prioritization which Mahesh presented, that's for City of Pune. Similarly, all of the other 4 cities are going to have such same project ideas, which are interlinked to the 7 spokes of the CAP tool, but also SDGs and resilience core benefits. I will share, I will hand it back to Sheva, so she can speak about Accelerator Summit briefly.
So it is our great hope that in February, we will be able to convene in person. I've had a chance to see some of the draft opportunity statements, and it's very exciting to see this work being applied and used by the cities and brought to life, where cities are sort of convening around this data, bringing stakeholders together and trying to decide what they want to do about this. So our goal will be, if all goes well and we can meet in person, to meet in February in Singapore, to bring together funders, partners, cities, and others to really brainstorm and think about how we might be able to make some of these solutions a reality. So it's been a very exciting process, but we have a lot to do between now and then. So the Resilient Cities Network is very busy conducting the opportunity assessment tool process with the cities. They just released a number of case studies around circular economy, so you can check those out. The CAP reports are going to be public and released. I think there's a link in the chat for those who want to take a look at those in more detail. And finally, Ocean Conservancy will be releasing a toolkit for cities to try to work through some of these circular challenges, so that if you're not in the Urban Ocean program, but you're still really interested in these topics, you can access this toolkit and try to work your way through some of these issues on your own. And if I'm forgetting anything, panelists, please jump in and let me know. But I think that's most of everything between now and then. So we're really in the thick of it now, and we're very excited about the work that's been done to date, and excited for what's still to come. So with that, I will wrap it up and thank everyone who's taken time out of their day. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to everyone behind the scenes, and thank you to everyone who took time out of their day to join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheva.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.